Elias Ashmold is an interesting character because he's not really a hero of mine, but he's a character of interest because he was on the wrong side in the Civil War, and he got captured at Lichfield, and he was forbidden to go into London. So he promptly went all the way up to Warrington, to his father-in-law, got himself initiated into the Lodge of Lights of Warrington, borrowed money off his brother-in-law, who was a member of Cromwell's army, bought a horse, and immediately rode into London, feeling that he was now protected by being a Freemason. And he then met John Wilkins and went from strength to strength. So he was a prime example of misusing Freemasonry for political advantage, and yet he's held up as a paragon of virtue. But so there's a podcast about him, telling him what I call it Elias Ashmole warts and all, because I took the trouble to read all his diaries, and I've extracted some salacious thoughts he had about various ladies he would have liked to marry for their money, and that's in the podcast too. So I wouldn't hold him up as a model of Masonic virtue, but he's a very interesting manipulator of Freemasonry, and he's just one among interesting characters. So I've been running a series for a while. I used to run them as a series of lectures about Masonic heroes, and since the lockdown I've turned them into podcasts about Masonic heroes. So they're all on my podcast initiative. So people who amuse and interest me.
Exactly. So we can discover more about them as well.
Yes.
Thank you. Robert, as a scientist, and part, like you earlier mentioned, of the group that created the first computer chip, 16-bit, early in the 70s, you know what is technology. You know how technology shaped society today. Now, can I ask, what is your view about new technologies that are having an impact in our life pre and post-COVID, and how this will shape the future of Freemasonry?
Yes, I think Freemasonry is a very interesting phenomenon because it's predicated around personal interaction. It's all been built around meetings and sharing things in meetings, and it's got a rigid cell structure with the idea that information doesn't leak between these various cells. And that's been part of our problems, that we've had difficulties during the 20th century, because it's obviously not transparent. And if you make it transparent, it stops working. And so that works very much against social media. So, for instance, if you're going to use social media, you want to be careful what you say, not because we've got any dire and dark secrets, but because if you simply alert people to the surprise that's going to happen in the degrees, you lose all the mental impact of that surprise and all the interest that will create. So, for instance, if I'd known before I was initiated into Ryburn Lodge that the test questions of the second degree that they'd rehearse for me after I'd been initiated, if I'd known that they were going to ask me to recite the Galilean heresy before I could become a fellowcraft, I wouldn't have been anything like as excited as it was. I knew nothing about it. So when they said that you'll have to ask these test questions, I listened to them and I thought, my God, why are they asking me that? And the first thing I said to my proposer when I came out of the initiation was, why have I got to recite the Galilean heresy before you let me be a fellowcraft? And he said, shut up and keep learning your ritual. So nobody even tried to answer the question. And that really, what I found totally inspirational, that should be incorporated. The bit about Freemasonry being diffused throughout the whole inhabited globe, therefore the sun must always be at its meridian with respect to Freemasonry. You've got to admit that the earth is going round the sun and the earth's rotating on its own axis. That would have got you locked up in the 1600s under house arrest. It did for Galileo.
True.
You know, so to have to recite that, that's serious.
Yeah.
No flat earther is ever going to become a fellow craft Freemason.
No, exactly. And it took 300 years to Galileo to get rid of the discommunication from the church. So
yeah, and so that struck me as really significant, and it was just glossed over. And that's really why I eventually decided to answer my own questions, because nobody else could or would. And by that time, my mother-in-law had passed away, so I wasn't able to ask her. And she'd have probably given me a reasonable attempt at it and said, it's all to do about learning the objects of that degree, and you'll have to take the degree to find out.
Absolutely. So you see that technology is not, it can't replace the physical experience of a ceremony.
I don't think it can. I don't think you can conduct a ceremony online. You can certainly help hold lodges together, because one of the things that I've been doing throughout the pandemic is issuing very tightly tiled podcasts, which are, everybody who gets them is on a bound not to distribute them, because I don't want them appearing wild on the internet. Anything you can Google on the internet loses its significance. It's not personal to you. It's not personal to the lodge. So I had in my mind a picture that I'd of my grandmother, my nine in Welsh, who had told me about during the Second World War, when she'd sat in an Anderson shelter in her backyard listening to the radio. And I thought, the way to do this is to distribute emailable size MP3s so that elderly brethren sitting on their own in glorious isolation, so they don't get infected, can actually play it like a little radio broadcast, and somebody's talking to them. So I'm modelling myself on people like Alvar Ladell during the Second World War, and talking to them about things that they're interested in. And it's proved to be very popular. The idea being you can distribute a podcast, listen to it before the meeting, and then discuss it on an open Zoom, an insecure Zoom platform.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without anybody getting at the original. And you can only get them through your lodge secretary distributing them. So it keeps you in touch with your lodge. So there are ways we can use technology, but we can't, it's not a substitute. An online ceremony does not engage you. You don't get the physical movement, you don't get the physical contact, you don't get the thresholds of fear which actually enhance your senses. You don't get the guy with the sword coming in and saying, "Get undressed."
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if you sat in your own study and he's doing it on a screen, you can just say, can't frighten me. And so
I think, can I just elaborate on something you just mentioned? Because
yeah.
Freemasonry is a generic word, but within Freemasonry you get different generations, and you get the elderly that know about a way of communication and interaction that is very much physical. But if you look at the young Masons, the millennials that are now in their 21st year of age, being in 2021, they have grew up with a phone on their hands, with a screen always on, with a way of sharing that particular 20 seconds via TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat that allows them to give that emotion of that moment. Will there be a split in between generation based on your knowledge of technology, but also Masonry in general, that will actually create a larger separation in between generation and Freemasonry, and the younger one will ask for more technology?
I think they are asking for more technology, because I started experimenting in this back in the late 90s, and I thought at the time one of the ways for encouraging new Masons to understand about the craft would be to make it available to them. So I created a website called the Web of Hiram, originally based at Bradford University. Although since I retired, they've asked me to curate it, and we've moved it out to the Janet network so I can be more open with it. Yeah. But effectively, I thought that was a way to do it. And I found, what I did find was that it didn't work. So this idea of putting a website where people can go and look up things and study it, it doesn't work. What worked was going out and engaging with them. So I did a whole series of talks, went round, regular visited lodges. Before lockdown, I was doing three talks a week, and I'd go back and revisit a cohort and follow them. And it was the personal interaction and the asking of questions. So what I did develop, my son and I have worked in IT for a long while, and my son's taken over the consultancy company now, and I'm now just chairman. So I don't get to do as much of the interesting stuff. But we thought what was needed was a Masonic intranet, not an so that effectively you're always only talking to a trusted Masonic brother. So we created the Open Lodge system, and that system, you cannot ask to join it. You can only be vouched for by somebody who is already a known and trusted brother. And if you ask to join it, unless you get a letter from your secretary vouching for you, you can't get in. So you cannot come in unless you're a Mason. And we've been using that to share information. You've experienced that. I invited you into some of the portals I run, and I can do things like that. I can use blogs. I can distribute videos on a very secure and tight system where I know they're only going to people in the right degrees. I can, it's got messaging systems which are completely secure. You don't have to share your email with people. You can just message them, and it keeps the email lists up to date. So I think we need something like that, and that was basically something that Geraint and I put together in order to encourage this sharing of information, a simple sharing of information, like are you having a meeting? What's the topic?
Yeah.
Can I come and visit you? Do you need to book a meal? all the simple, and that we've had that up and running now for about 8 to 9 years, and it's proved to be very successful. It's proved to be very successful for the people who are interested. And of course, during lockdown, the podcast initiative I've opened up to all our brother Masons. So effectively, if you become a podcast facilitator, it's a demilitarized zone. You'll find women Mason, you'll find co-Masons like Julian Rees, you'll find Masons from other constitutions, because I'm an honorary member in lots of different constitutions, and the podcasts are shared widely with anybody who will just give me their word of honour that they will not distribute them on the open net.
Yeah.
So I think you can use the net to distribute, but the one thing that makes us different is the personal interaction for the sharing of secrets.
Yeah.
And that you can do part of it online, but the actual sharing of the secret, I think, demands a personal ceremony, but you can then enhance and teach and build up. So there's a whole series of podcasts going through the catechismal lectures.
Yeah.
There's a podcast with a linked PDF which will do you the full version of the tracing board, and that could be used when we go back to normal. Yeah. If people haven't learned the tracing board, they can play the podcast in front of their own lodge tracing board.
Yeah.
For their initiative, then give it them afterwards.
Yeah.
So there are ways we can use it which will satisfy the digital needs of the millenniums. And I must admit, I share a lot of that digital wonder. So I can see ways of doing it, but I think we've got to do it very carefully.
Yeah.
And you can't simply put it on open channels. I've been very careful about the way I've been doing video broadcasts, because if they're not tiled, you've got to be careful what you say, because otherwise you put out spoilers.
Correct.
And if you put out spoilers, the system doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. Robert, we move in the last question. As an author, as a passionate reader, and very much interested in the work that you've done, you introduced me to the last book that you have completed, the Masonic Tutor's Handbook, Volume 2, Freemasonry After COVID-19. Can you share something about the book and the criteria that brought you to write this book?
Yes, I can do. It'll probably be out towards the end of the month. I'm in the process of proofreading it at the moment. But that's the roots. The original of the second volume was going to be the Fellowcraft degree, because I've decided to do a series of Masonic Tutors handbooks which contain all the useful information a proposer and seconder would need in order to make sure that their candidate goes through properly. And the first one was the duties of the entered apprentice master. So I put in a description of the first degree, I put in a full definition, the full tracing board, which can be read out if you haven't learnt it. I put various action learning tasks that you can carry out with your entered apprentice. There's no right and wrong answers. It's the doing the task that matters. Like find the oldest past master in the lodge and ask him why he's still bothered about coming to lodge. And you'll get an interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
What he'll say to you, but if he's still interested, he'll say something to you and it will be interesting.
Allow me to vouch on this one. I did it, and it's a fantastic experience. So definitely, yes.
And all you do is get them to record that, and it's the doing it and the recording it and the reporting back where the learning takes place.
Yeah.
So there's a whole system, and there's also a support website set up with through the web of Hiram where you can ask questions that you can't answer yourself. Because part of the worry is sometimes a proposer or seconder doesn't feel confident to answer questions, so they can put them to me and if I can't answer it, I'll probably know somebody who can. So I'll get an answer and post it on the frequently asked questions page. But the second one was going to be the Fellowcraft until we then went into lockdown. And at that point, I realised this was the first time in our history since 1483 that we had ever been forbidden to meet, and that we were listening to the advice. We've been forbidden to meet in war zones and such, but it didn't stop us. Correct. But this stopped us because the danger was we would kill our elder brethren if we infected them. So we actually submitted to not meeting. Now that's very dangerous for an order which relies on meeting to hold it together. And I've been looking at the history of Freemasonry since the Second World War, and basically trying to work out what was the problem, what problems we were having with recruitment. So I've been giving a lecture about that, a quite popular lecture around the lodges since 2009, and it showed what had been happening when we'd hit peak masonry in 1991, and the effects of the decline and multiple memberships and handing in of warrants. And basically, I just applied my normal systems analyst skill to the numbers and pulled out the interesting statistics. I turned that into a podcast, and it got a lot of interesting feedback on that particular podcast. But my analysis basically stopped in 2010, because that's when I'd written that particular paper about the future of Freemasonry. And I got a lot of feedback saying, why don't you update this? So I thought, all right, much else to do except cut grass. So I may as well update it. Anyway, the New and Young Masons Club in London, who I think you know, Mitch, from that, he rang me, he got in touch with me and said, will you give us a talk? So I said, yeah, I'll give you a talk. What do you want me to talk about? And he said, you've been doing a podcast on the future of Freemasonry. Would you mind bringing it up to date and giving it for? So I said, yeah, can I have a month or so we'll do it in 2 months' time. That'll give me time to get up to date. I collected together all the various data I needed, and I then analysed what had been happening over the period up to peak masonry in 1991, and then from peak masonry down to the COVID shutdown. And it had occurred, I'd already developed some analysis tools for lodges I cared about. And there is one very quick way of doing a risk analysis on a lodge. You only need 2 items of anonymous information. You need to know the year of birth and the rank of an individual.
Yeah.
And the rank being entered apprentice, fellow craft, master mason, or past master. Those are the only 4 that matter. If you then put those into a spreadsheet, you can work out what your age profile is, what your ladder structure is like, and you can also then apply criteria for what is a healthy lodge drawn from past experience. So you look into the history, you see what was a healthy lodge up to 1991. You can then look at how these have changed in the following period. And of course, you can then come up with a very simple criteria for judging the overall health of Freemasonry. I've called it the F number, the Freemasonry number. And it's very simply the ratio between the number of Grand Lodge certificates issued in a year and the number of active lodges. If every lodge hasn't on average got 1 new candidate each year, you cannot maintain a progression, you cannot maintain the teaching system, because the teaching system involves having Freemasonry being done to you through 3 degrees, then doing Freemasonry to the candidates through the various offices where you each do different parts of it. You know, you start by challenging them at the lodge door with a poniard and sticking the chest and saying, "Do you feel a prick?" And of course they've got to answer yes. So, and you go up until eventually you actually kill them with a large setting maul.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've experienced everything from every viewpoint.
Yeah.
And then you be careful that this only goes out to Master Masons, by the way. And then as an immediate past master, you sit in the chair watching other people doing Freemasonry to others, and you reflect on it, and then you start to understand. Now, if you cannot maintain that succession, you can only have the surprise once. If you're recycling past masters into your chain of offices, your lodge is in trouble. I mean, yes, you can have installed Masters Lodge where people go through it again, but they're only playing at Freemasonry. They're not actually experiencing it afresh for the first time. And so it's quite important, that number. And if you analyse that number, and it's all the detail is in the book and all the figures are there, you'll see we were in trouble long before we hit COVID. And with COVID, we are in absolute serious trouble because we've gone 18 months effectively with no new candidates. I'd like at least part of Freemasonry to survive. I don't think it's all going to survive. People have drifted away, they'll have lost interest, there'll be a whole spate of resignations because people can't afford it anymore. And we need to make sure that we maintain a core. And I think it's vitally important that we understand what makes Freemasonry work. We're not a charitable organisation, although we do charity. We're not a dining club, although we dine. We've got one thing that makes us totally different from every other organisation. We study truth. We've been studying truth for the best part of 600 years. We study the way symbols relate to truth. We're a peculiar system of morality, illuminated by symbols. And the symbols are important. If you want to join a dining club, you can join a much better dining club than Freemasonry. If you want to do charity, the Rotary Club. There's any number of organisations that do charity better than we do. There's nobody else does the study of truth. It's the one thing that makes us different. And I think if we're going to build rebuild the craft, we need to make sure that we bring this to people's attention. That's what attracts people to us. It's been what's driving the university system, which has been so successful. It's the curiosity about what secrets we can comply. I mean, come on, students don't need to join Freemasonry to go to a drinking club.
Correct.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Exactly.
And they don't need to take lessons from crusty old men on how to go out and raise funds. I've been rag secretary. I've been out shaking tins on streets and creating floats. We're good at that sort of thing. What is different is the study of truth.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we understand that, we understand the way in which we teach truth with the progression, and that we look at what's involved in this. And that's what this book is about.
Yeah.
It's looking at the issues we had in recruitment and retention, how we got into that position with the rapid growth after the First World War, and the resurgence again after the Second World War. And it's looking at it's making positive suggestions for what we can do about it. Because there are certain lodges I would dearly like to survive. And I'd like to go back and play the organ for them again.
Yeah, sure. Robert, thank you so much. We began a conversation in order to arrive to this interview, and the man that I knew as an author, he actually happened to be a fascinating person in person. So for as much as we can call this an in-person meeting, I truly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for everything you shared with us. Just a clarification for everybody. The book is coming on March 2021, so this month on a video. It can actually change across time, but March 2021, your book, the Masonic Tutor Handbook, Volume 2, Freemasonry After COVID-19 is coming out.
It should be published towards the end of March.
Correct.
It's nearly ready to go.
Via our friend Martin Folks on Louis Masonic.
Yeah.
Once again, thank you so much, and I look forward to actually meet in person and share more thoughts about this fascinating topic.
Yes, I need to take you to my favourite Italian restaurant so you realise what a real lasagna is like.
Very good. We'll do that. Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much.